Hi, I'm Kevin,
And I'm Amanda.
and we are serving up
All that jam.
All That Jam, Quick Hit. Matt Rifino on the late 80s sound.
You had mentioned about your kid. So I have an 11-year-old, and I down in our basement where he usually is like hanging out with his friends. We have the old school stereo and like all my cassettes and CDs and everything. And one day, a year or so ago, I hear this music coming from downstairs, and they had they had put on a CD, and then they put a tape in, and they were like, "What is this?" And they were saying how different they sound, right, between one and the other. And so just that feel that you're talking about, I mean, I think honoring that is like the most important thing. And then on the other hand too, pushing it a little bit, and I think sometimes it's good for people to be given something that does sound a little bit different than maybe what they're used to, because it's going to open up their thinking of like what's possible, and like what's good.
I try to go by the philosophy of like I want to push it as far as I can while keeping the intent of the artist intact. Like every time that I grab a knob, I'm altering their performance. I don't care if it's an EQ or a compressor or reverb. I'm now affecting what they played. So, like with drums, for instance, a lot of times you got to do a lot of stuff to make drums sound really good. And when you do that, you are now altering the dynamics of that player. So I want to do like my best. I want my intent to be correct. Yes, I want to enhance the drummer's sound. But if I go so far to enhance it that it doesn't feel like him anymore, I'm doing a big disservice to him and the band and the listener. So it's like, well, how far can I push these things while not screwing with the original emotion? And that's a fine line.
it makes me think of Vince Welnick and Bob Brailov and the way that Brailov did that MIDI
Yep.
thing on the little Casio. And poor Vince, I mean, he was a really good, I mean, he played with the tubes. He was a good keyboard player, and he never got to do his thing, you know?
Yeah. No, it's it's a
It's okay.
miss.
You don't have to say anything.
No, that's dead keyboard players and me. It's a whole thing. But
Right.
I could go down the Brent rabbit hole for
I'm with you.
you
I
know.
think I think there's plenty there to dig into.
I
That could
was
be a whole podcast, just me
I was
talking
gonna
about Brent.
say,
I was a
yeah.
Brent head
Me too.
myself.
Me too.
You know?
Big time. When I was coming up, that was his era. So for me, like the first stuff I mean, like for me, the first studio out, not studio, but the first live album I had from them after Europe 72 was Without a Net. And that like lived in my disc man for ever.
Right.
It's just such a, and that's like Brett's record if he had a record to
Right.
me.
Where do you rank the mix one Without a Net?
I like it a lot actually.
I think it's beautiful.
I'm to not get all nerdy. I'm a fan of late 80s, early 90s sounding records. To me, though, like Joe Jackson did a record in that period that's really great sounding. Even Steve Winwood, those late 80s Steve Winwood, I don't care what you say. They've
Back in
got
the High
this,
Life is hot. It
it's
is.
got such a, yeah, it's clean and it's pristine and it's 80s, but like it's a moment in time that I can just really appreciate. Like those, I don't know if you ever heard a band called Jellyfish. Um, they did a couple of records in the early 90s that kind of have that thing to it. And it's a nice representation of that time. And that to me, Without a Net is, it doesn't sound like any of their other live stuff,
Right.
and I'm sure there's OG fans that will say that it's the worst. I
The
think it's one of the
performances
best.
were fantastic. I mean, that Eyes of the World, it might be one of their top 5 performances ever.
Totally agree there. Totally agree.
That is funny though. I'll be 43 here in a couple months, and so I came up in probably a very similar
Yeah, I'm 42.
era.
So.
Yeah, and so I definitely remember there'd be times where I'd be expressing kind of a similar opinion, but that's just because what I knew the best, right? That's what I associated my listening experience with, and you kind of get a look like, really? Like, well, yeah, because it definitely had a flavor. And you could have your eyes closed and put on 30 seconds of something from that time period and definitely be able to know exactly where it
Yeah.
came from, you know?
And they really all sort of do. I mean, in music in general, there sort of
Yeah.
is that, and then the really good ones are timeless.
Yep.
You know, the stuff that really stands out, like, you're never gonna you can't tell me, like, other than maybe the most recent stuff when a Rolling Stones song was released. It all sounds like the Rolling Stones, whether it's from 1967 or 1977 or 1981, it sounds like the Stones, right? It doesn't sound like, "Oh, that's the Stones mid-80s era where they went to synths." Like, no, it's the Stones. It sounds like them. And, but there is eras that I do like where there's like a sonic thing. The problem is if it goes too much, it's not timeless anymore. That's what I'm always worried about when I'm adding stuff. I'm like, is this going to
I feel
sound
like
like 2020? You
it's
know?
so many bands, Heart, ZZ Top, Chicago, when they embraced MTV, they changed the way their stuff sounded. It's so weird, and it just I feel like all those bands were just abused by MTV. A lot of that stuff, Boston in their third album,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I think that's a really interesting period in music now that we've gone off on this weird tangent. But I always think that I look at that period as somewhere in the 80s, late 80s, technology and talent met. And they met together where you had enough technology to create what you wanted, and the musicians were still so talented that they could push that technology to the new level. I think now we've got to the point where technology has trumped the artist, and now technology dictates the sound and not the feel of the artist. It's sort of at some point it crossed over and the talent started kind of disappearing and the technology took over for it. And, if you look at, school systems and the music programs and everything else from where it starts and for what is popular now, look at, I bet you Guitar Center sells more samplers than they do guitars
and auto tuners.
and auto tuners. So it's a different, now the new music is generated with that, where, Jerry Garcia generated with the banjo in the beginning, right? It's like now kids are doing
Yeah.
it. Like you got a couple of young kids down at the studio there, and they're not like into like I want to set up a drum kit and have a whole thing, and they're like, and that's their rhythm section. That's what they know. Who are we to say that it's wrong? It's just a different taste.
If you are enjoying All That Jam, please like and subscribe to our social media channels at All That Jam Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or visit our website, allthatjampod.com. Make sure to sign up for our email list and tune in every week for new episodes.
Also, look for full interviews on our YouTube channel. And remember, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long.